Hi, my name is James Peters. I'm the Director of International Business Development for VirTra. I'm here today to do an instructional video on the setup and teardown of our portable V-100 system. One of the reasons that we're doing this is when I came to work for VirTra in 2012, I was a subject matter expert here. I traveled around the country with single screen systems. In 2014, I took over, moved over to the international business development side, and I have literally spent 6 to 7 months out of the year since 2014 in foreign countries by myself, flying commercially all over with systems very similar and some even more complex than this. I've spent those years on different time frames, different time zones, different schedules than VirTra is here at headquarters. And so I had to learn along the way, not just what we teach, but some pro tips. And so one of the things I will be doing throughout this video is offering up those pro tips and trying to explain to you why I do it the way I do. So having said that, we're going to get into the first portion of this video, which is going to be the screen setup. One of the reasons that I start off with the screen is because I want my space open. I don't want any of the simulator parts where the screen might fall, get dirty, tear, that kind of stuff. So over here in the SKB case, I obviously have our simulator. And then in this big daylight case is where our screen is. So for this, I'll go ahead and move the SKB case off to the side. And then I'll begin to open up the screen case. One of the things I want you to refer to first is what you should be looking for in this case as it starts to pop open, so that you have an idea, do I have everything here or not? Okay, now that you have an idea of what should be in this case, if you need to refer back to what items are called or things like that, feel free to refer back to that what's in the case slide that we added here. But we start to open up with the buckles, and I always take the top and get that off to the side so that I'm not worried about, again, the screen getting on something. This is a foam case that some people will cut and put in here just because there is some room in to keep the screen kind of flat. I always leave the screen in the case and move it over to the side also until I am ready to bring it out. Okay, first thing that's coming out is my actual screen frame. We want to be careful because of how this thing folds. It could end up pinching you. Then I'm going to bring out my legs. And finally, my spacer bar for the middle. And then my bag of speed cranks and bolt. I'll get this out of the way now. There's kind of two ways of doing this, setting the screen up. There's either if you're by yourself or if you're there with a partner. Some of the things that I would do is if I'm by myself, everything is going to be done on the ground, so I don't have to worry about screens tipping over. I don't have to worry about the buckles and the joints in these things falling and pinching me, any of that. If I'm with a partner, then what I would do is go through the setup of the screen, and then I would hang the screen from there because I have an extra set of hands. But because I'm by myself, what we're gonna see here is the actual setup as a single individual. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start to lay out my frame. Okay, once I have my frame in this orientation, what I want to make sure is when I start to pull this, I'm going to keep these buttons here face up. That's important because the screen is going to lay on top. The other thing that is important is to look for the marking that says top. There is a sticker on the screen. I believe it is right here. This sticker here says top. That means that that is going to be the top bar. So before I start to peel things apart, what I want to do is reorientate my screen frame. And now I want to simply bring it out, lock it down in place. Okay, I'm going to go to each corner and I'm going to kick to make sure that that brace is locked in place. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take that middle spreader bar and I'm going to place that in place. So I'm going to open it up. It goes in the center of my screen. If I actually reach back on the back side of the screen, I'm going to find the actual hole where it will go right there. So I line that up. Then I'm going to get into my speed crank and bolt case. I'm going to find the 2 bolts. Now all I'm going to do is hand tighten these. These don't need to be cranked down very tight. There's no real reason for them to be overly tight. The reason that this bar is important is because the screen is going to be pretty tight. And when I start to stretch and snap that screen into place, what's going to happen is it's going to start to sag and pull both the bottom and the top down, which we obviously don't want to do. We want to have as square of a screen projected image as we can. Okay, now that I have that down, once again, just make sure each of my corners are tight. And now we're going to take out our screen. Okay, when I take out the screen and bring it out of this protective case, if I have packed it away correctly, which I will show you at the end, you should end up getting your, in white lettering where it says top. So I know that is the top of my frame. That is important because when these screens are manufactured, they are created so that the buttons are in the same place. If you get a screen upside down, it may or may not button correctly. So you always want to put top with top. So now I'm just going to lay out my screen, black side down. And what I like to do is take and get a corner and at least one button, sometimes two either side as I start to lay this out. That way I won't pull it off. Okay, now that I've got that in, I can take an edge and I can pull it, making sure that the white does not touch the ground. I do not want to get the white on the ground. If for some reason you do end up dropping the screen, dragging it along the ground, it gets dirty, a simple mild soap is able to clean that up. Don't use any abrasive type of cleaners. Okay, now that I have this kind of laid out, the newer the screen, the harder these next two steps are going to be. The longer a screen has been around, when it's got some age on it and it is stretched out, this will be an easy step. But one of the things that I have found for me that makes it easier, whether it's a brand new screen or an older screen, is the first thing that I do is I place my toe at the edge of the screen frame. Then when I go to apply that button, that snap, I have something that I'm actually bracing against. Again, I'll go out one or two buttons and then I'll go to my final. This is, again, going to be your toughest corner on a brand new screen, this final fourth corner. Sometimes you will have to use these little flaps to actually get on and be able to pull. This one has been around for a little bit, so it's not as tight. And again, I'm going to come out one or two, and now I am going to snap all the way around. Now that I've got my screen all snapped up, next thing I'm going to do is extend my T-legs. Okay, two important parts on these T-legs is that they are actually do have a marking on them where they will stay either stage left or stage right. Okay, this one is marked stage right. Remember that stage right is opposite of what you're looking at if you're looking at the screen. It would be as if you were standing on the screen looking out at the audience. So stage right is over here on this side. The other thing that I take into consideration is the black knob always is on the outside of the screen, and the screen itself is going to sit in front. So this is going to be behind the screen, which means that the black knob portion, I need to be able to get into this 90-degree angle. Okay, so I've got the first one done. I'm gonna move to the second one. Bit of a pro tip here before we get moving on. Sometimes you won't be given the luckiness or to be able to go to any room that has very high ceilings. And so what I've seen is sometimes the screen itself will fit within a room, however this pole will not. And so there is no reason that you cannot mount this pole with this down also. In fact, when we go through this, I actually tend to pull them down, but this does not have to be up. There's no reason for that. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is grab two speed cranks, and I'm going to start to mount this. Now, whether you start from the screen left side, the screen right side, that doesn't matter. If you have two people, obviously you both can start to put these T-legs on at the same time. It is a little bit harder to do by yourself, but again, to do it safely, what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to turn the T-leg just like this, because I know my screen is going to sit flat on here. Sorry, flat on here. Again, the black knob out. Then I'm going to pick up my screen and I'm going to make sure it's all the way down in that 90 degree, okay? Now, there are 3 locations on these screen frames where you could actually put in a speed crank, but I don't really need to hit the middle one. So all I'm going to do is make sure that I'm on the top one. Just has to be finger tight. Then I'm going to go to the very last one. As you can see here, here's the third one. Now, if you want to put it in there, a speed crank in there, that it's not going to affect anything. But as long as you have the bottom and the top one screwed in, then you're good to go, okay? Now, because I have one leg on, I have the support to be able to bring my screen up. I personally, at this point, take all of these legs, whether or not I have the room or not, and place it down. So now I have one side done. I'm going to grab 2 more speed cranks. I'm going to move over to the stage right side. I'm going to put it on. We've got the 3 different locations that the speed crank can go into. All I'm concerned about is the top and the bottom one. You may have to pull up a little bit to get it started. I personally like to keep these in line with the metal bar just in case I have a trainee or someone walking around. They don't grab onto it, so I don't want it to bite their skin or anything. Put in the last one. Okay, now your screen is together. Now we're going to put it in place. A couple pro tip ideas to think about. Number 1, you do not need a screen. If you have a flat wall, if you have an area that doesn't have a lot of light switches or pictures or something like that you want to project onto, there's nothing wrong with that. You'll go through the same exact process that we're about to go through as far as setting up the simulator, but you do not need this screen part. Our tracking cameras will work just fine. It is better if the paint on that wall is white. But it does not matter if it's gray. The only difference is the darker the color, the image is going to be a little bit more muted. Okay, so our screen is now done. I'll end up picking up the speed cranks, putting them in the black box, which I end up using to throw a lot of my stuff in during my installation, to kind of keep it in one place so I know where everything is. And now we'll move on to the simulator portion. Okay, so now I'm going to unsnap the box. And again, this should look very familiar to what you see. I've got my VirTra box number 1. I'm going to set over here. I've got my VirTra number 2. I'm going to set over here. I've got an unmarked box, which is my actual projector. And then I've got VirTra number 3, which I'll set right there. Go ahead and get my SKB case out of the way. Then I'll begin the process here. The way that the simulators are set up, they can either have the instructor station on the stage left side, they can have the instructor station on the stage right side. Certain screens, you do have the ability to have a dual project screen. This is a front project only screen. The dual project allows the light to pass through from the back. So you could end up having your projector behind the screen if you have a big enough room, a big enough area to train. The good thing about having a dual project screen is it does end up giving you a little bit more flexibility on your training venue, because if I have my projector behind, then I can come and train all the way from the screen plane to anywhere else that I have within the room. That can also be accomplished by having the V-100 permanently mounted in your actual training environment. So if you do have a dedicated room that you don't need to worry about tearing down and setting up your simulator, we can do a permanent mount system, which would have the projector from the screen. You'd still have a little bit of shadowing. Again, that could also be a permanent mounted screen projector from the rear too, so that you could train from the screen plane on back. This one is as if you were having to set up and tear down, whether it be you were using the same room or whether it be that's a multi-purpose room and it gets used by other people. We're going to set it up today just because of the room dimensions and where we are. We're going to set it up to be a stage right instructor station. So all of my stuff is going to be over here. If you were to set it up on the left, the only difference is everything that I'm going to show you today is opposite side. And when you get into how the speakers are, where the wiring harness goes and that kind of stuff. So again, we'll start with the setup. I've got this instructor station here that I'm going to use as my thing. I'm going to come over. First one out is going to be my laptop. Again, I have found that if I keep in a numerical order, things seem to just go smoother for me, because I always know the steps I'm at and where I'm going to be. Next one I'm going to open up is the box number 2. Inside are your speakers. There are 2 speakers. They are designed to work together. As you see though, one of them has a volume button, an auxiliary, and a headphone port. The other one does not. What that means is that this one with the volume always needs to be on the screen, on the side of the screen where you are going to set your instructor station up. So for this one, it will be over here. And for this one, will be over here. As you can see, I ended up putting the speakers on the outside of the legs. The reason that is because once I get the projector up and throwing, if I were to put them on the inside of the leg, you would end up having a shadow on your screen. So always put them on the outside. Next thing out of the box is I'm going to unwrap out of the safety packaging the shot tracking camera. I typically always try to get it set up and tied into place. I spread out the legs. One of the things that I make sure that I do on this is I always turn my cameras so that I have a single leg forward and dual legs in the rear. That really helps me be able to make fine adjustments if I'm on a floor that's uneven and I need to make those adjustments. So I'm going to set that down. Now I'm going to pull from case number 3, I'm going to pull the wiring harness. Inside the wiring harness, I also have the power block for my laptop and also the mouse. There is some speaker wire in here. This speaker wire is actually what connects the 2 speakers together. It is the only separate portion of the wiring harness that's not within loom. The big thing is that you take a look at these, and one is marked with the blue stripe, the other one is not. That is important only in the sense of if you put the blue stripe in the red over here, then it needs to go in the red over there. I'm going to put it with the blue stripe in the red and the no stripe in the black. Now, I personally take and run my wiring through this little triangle portion of the screen all the way in the back. That way it doesn't pop out from underneath the screen. Nobody has a chance of tripping on it or anything else. And again, blue marked wire in the red or positive, other wire in the black or negative. Now, there is some obvious portions of this wiring harness. There's some not so obvious portions, so we'll kind of talk about that. I like to try to get my wiring harness completely untangled, as it could end up tangling within the system there. One end of your wiring harness is going to have some micro USBs. Those micro USBs are to your shot tracking camera. So you know then that means that power cord and that HDMI cord are to your projectors, okay? So we're gonna lay those out kind of going this way. Obviously, it's pretty self-explanatory that anything to do with the speakers, so your RCA plugs, they're going to go to this powered speaker, which is usually attached to this power cord. I have seen sometimes people, when they tear it down, when I tear it down, I unplug the actual power cord and leave everything together. I have seen some people unplug. So that is sometimes how you will see it. And then this will remain in the speaker. I personally leave this all attached. And then obviously the rest of this cord ends up going to my instructor station, okay? Now, once I get to this location and kind of this setup right now, the next thing I do is pull out my projector, and inside my projector case, I'm gonna have my projector, my mouse pad, and my projector's remote control. Okay, now that I have everything laid out, now I'm gonna start to plug things in. What you do not want to do is start to power anything up until everything is plugged in. The way that the VirTra services work, the way that Windows works, all of that kind of stuff, as long as the system is completely powered down when you unplug things, and as long as everything is completely plugged in when you turn it back on, the system will work correctly. Sometimes if you do that out of order, what will end up happening is you won't get your downrange image because you'll have both images on your laptop. So as long as you take these steps, you shouldn't have a problem at any point. So now I begin with the plugging in of the instructor station. I start with my power cord. I move on to my HDMI, and then USB can go in the first or second port. It doesn't matter which one it goes into. And then my audio cable is always going to go into the audio out port. This is actually probably one of the biggest things that we get calls on, because people end up plugging it into this headphone port. Whenever you have an actual audio out port, which all our laptops do, that is the one it gets plugged into. So I plug it into the second one, and then I go ahead and I plug in my mouse into my final USB. Now I've got my instructor laptop station plugged in. Now I'm going to move over to my audio, since I'm right here, and it is red to red and white to white. And then I will plug in my power. Always make sure that this is in the on position, that the power button is in the on position at this point. Now I'll just kind of dress up my wiring harness so that it looks good for my trainees or anybody else who may come in to view my training. Come back over to my projector shot tracking camera, plug in my power cord, And I'm going to plug in my HDMI. I'm going to plug in my micro USBs. It doesn't matter which one, they're both universal the way that it's set up, so it doesn't matter which one. Now, I take this camera and with this extra cord, I put it back here because we're gonna have some other things to do. And before I leave, the last thing I do is open up the cover on the front of my projector. Now, come back over. I start to plug things in, whether it's with the provided power strip or whether you're plugging it into the wall, however you do it. On these systems, there's going to be 3 power cords to plug in. First, I plug in my computer, and then I plug in my others, which is going to be, one is actually for my speaker, and the other one is for my actual projector. Okay, then I'm going to again dress up my wiring harness a little bit. Now that I have everything plugged in, I know that everything is plugged in correctly. I don't have any missing ends of any kind of wires left out. Gonna go ahead and turn on the laptop at that point, and I'm gonna let it boot up. And then once it boots up, we will move to the next portion, which is the calibration of both the projector and the shot tracking cameras. Okay, now that my system is powered up, my laptop's powered up, I've got power to my speakers and to my projector. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna launch VOS and I'm going to turn the projector on. The icon placement is something that's kind of a personal preference. Obviously, everybody knows you can drag those around, put them where you want them. Typically, in the very top left corner of the screen is where you will see the VOS icon. All I'm gonna do is come over and double click on the VOS icon, and it's gonna bring up this, it's gonna start loading, and I want that to load for a little bit and get everything into working up and operating properly. Then I'm gonna go ahead and hit the power button, and I know that the projector goes on when I hear the beep and I see the second blue light go on to the projector. Okay, now that everything's powered up, the next thing is to get my image correct within the screen. There's a couple different ways to do it. I've seen the projectors set up both ways. Sometimes they say that it's accidental how they got onto that. I don't really know, so I'm going to show you the 2 different ways in case you start to see it. The projectors do have an automatic screen fit. I don't particularly like that because it is based on how much light is in the room, and if it's not dark enough, it won't actually happen. So if you come over to your projector so that you're facing your screen, you get on to your actual, whether it's on your remote control or it's on your projector, it doesn't matter. You hit the menu button, and in the menu button you're then going to scroll down to settings, and that top one says Keystone, Quick Corner. Now that means that this projector is currently set to Quick Corner. If I click on that, there is another one called HV Keystone. I don't like using that. However, if I click over on the HV Keystone and I change it to that, it's going to end up distorting it. But I go ahead and change it. And now I'm looking at the V Keystone, the H Keystone, and the Auto HV Keystone off. I always want to make sure that when I have this, if I am using this particular setup, that when I go to position my camera, that my HV Keystone and my H Keystone are both set at 0, and that the Auto HV Keystone is set to off. If it's set to on, you're going to end up getting images that will flash up. It'll have some white circles. It'll do some different things there. But you don't end up wanting that on there, because if I end up moving this projector, every little change I have to it, that's going to happen. Okay, and it sometimes gets it right, it sometimes doesn't get it right. But again, if I move this, it's going to go through an automatic process. And that kind of gets a little bit harder to do and can get me out of whack. So again, I go into my menu, to my settings, to my keystone. And if I'm going to use HV keystone, then I go ahead and I come down to auto and turn that off. And then my V, you now see, is at 8, and I want to make sure that that is at 0. Okay, now I personally have found that the quick corner is better, and that not only is it better, I get a better image out of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down, I'm going to keep it on quick corner. And now this allows me to get into each individual image. What I want to do is I want to make sure that the image itself, the projected image, is within that black area, just outside of the white. So I want to have a projected image that's thrown outside of the white. I also want to have the lens of my projector in the center of the screen. So that means that my projector is actually going to be shifted to the right or stage left a little bit more than it normally would be. So when I get that down, I'm going to get it somewhere about there. Now, there is a white line that is in the center of the VirTra that you can see up there on screen. And if you look, those two knuckles that are on the screen frame here and also here are the center of the screen frame. And so I do have some kind of image to be able to focus my eyes on and kind of get an idea when this thing is centered up. Okay, now what I want to do is, I don't know if you can see, but the image is projected beyond the screen. So I want to start to bring this in closer until I get it to where my image is not being thrown on either side of the screen. Okay, so I'm getting it somewhere about there. Okay, now you see that my top of my screen has a little black border. What that ends up happening is, if I lift up my projector, on the very front there's a foot. If I go ahead and I push the gray button, that foot should end up falling down. Okay, now that's at an extreme, and as you can see now on the screen, the image is extremely off. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to push that button in, and I'm going to try to bring the bottom of the picture down to at least the bottom of the black. There is a reason for that, and that reason is that all of our images, all of our scenarios, whether it be in marksmanship, V-Author, or video-based, are all based on the fact that you, the trainee, are on the same plane as the person on screen. So to get as close to reality as possible, I want to bring that projected image down to that black. Okay, so that's what I'm going to work on right now, fine-tuning. Again, pushing that button, allowing me to move down on that foot. Now, one of the things you got to take into consideration is when you do allow the weight of the projector to go down, it is going to settle, especially because we're on carpet. The other problem is that this particular projector, or this particular floor that the projector is on, as everywhere else, is not completely flat and perfect. And that is the reason that I use Quick Corner, because Quick Corner allows me now to pull in each corner and bring in this image where I want to have it. So once it's there, it's highlighted. I know I'm going to be working with that corner up there. I hit the enter button, and then I can slowly move my corner in so that it is where I want it to be. Once I have it where I want in that image, I go ahead and click. I then move over to the next corner, and I do this for all of my corners. If you get to a point where you see that gray arrow and you're pushing on that up and you just get a gray arrow, what that means is you have extended how far that particular portion will actually go. So I hit OK. Okay, now that I have that, I can hit the escape button, escape button, escape button, and now I'm back up to my image. So now I know that my image is roughly where I want it to be. Now, for the most part, that's going to be good enough, especially if you're running scenarios, because there are no hard lines. There's no trainee HUD like there is in marksmanship. If for some reason you want to really make sure that this thing is dialed in, one of the things you can do is go ahead and come over to your user interface, and you could end up clicking on a marksmanship range. And then once that range opens up, you can kind of get an idea if you are actually squared off on your actual image. Again, this step you don't necessarily need to do. This step is something that I have found prepares me no matter what training I'm going to actually get into. So as you can see on screen, my black trainee HUD on my marksmanship is straight across the top. I'm pretty good, except now what I notice is that on this side of the image, I'm pretty straight up and down, but on this side of the image, the top has actually moved over farther than the bottom. So I would go back in real quick into my menu, come down to my settings, go over to my keystone. Again, we're on the quick corner. I would go up to that one. I would move it over. Okay, so now I know everything is correct. I go ahead and hit OK on this. Then I go ahead and I get out of this. And now I know that my image is all lined up and perfect to go. So now the next step that I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my tape measure over. I'm going to come in the center of the screen, and I'm going to see what my projected image height is. So the very first thing I do is I put my tape measure on the ground, and I take a look at where the actual dark mark is, meaning that that projector is not projecting anything below that mark, which is at a 1/2 inch. So I keep in my mind a 1/2 inch. Now I run it up here, and I find that that mark is at 82.5. And so I know then I take a 1/2, I minus it from 82.5, and I know that my actual projected image right now is 82 inches. Then I come over to my user interface. I click out of the marksmanship portion. I go to the power button and I stop all simulations, which should then bring up my VirTra. Once that happens, I go home, administration. I click on the system, simulator system config. That is going to bring up screen 2, which is the screen downrange. I right click on that, put edit screen size, and now I come in, I click on the measurement, Now I'm using inches, so I want to get rid of the convert value, click on inches, and then I want to type in 82. Now, because this is a 16:9 format, the system will automatically do the math to say if that is 82 inches high, then it has to be X amount wide. If it was a 4K projector that we offer, again, you would put the height and then it would know based on 4K projection standards what the actual width is. So I put in 82 inches, I hit apply, I kind of hover over it and it tells me that it is 82 inches and the screen width is 145.778 inches. That is the mathematical height and width of that projected image right now. All right, now that we have the screen all set up, and now because of that, that's going to allow everything to be perspectively accurate. Now we're going to get into the actual calibration of the system. Okay, now that I have everything set up, my last piece is going to be my camera setup and my actual calibration of the shot tracking and low light camera. I'm going to go ahead and bring this over. Like I said before, I always like to point the cameras at the screen and have the single leg forward with the double legs out. I put it right on top of my projector, being careful not to drastically move the projector. If I need to move anything within the camera or the cameras themselves, it's this front lock button which puts it on a swivel. As long as I have it pretty much because of this distance pointed at the screen, I should be pretty close to being okay. I need to lock that button into place though, so that at no point, especially when things heat up here, that drops off and falls. What I also like to do before I start to get into the real fine tuning of these cameras is I go ahead and I click on the user interface just to check out what the image actually looks like. So I will come in first, I will click on the home button, then I would click on administration again, and I first go into my tracking camera. Tracking camera I bring up and I click on run calibration. Once that camera connects and it brings up this image, all I'm looking for is that the entirety of the screen is within that box. Okay, the way that those cameras come oriented from VirTra, as long as that's within this box right here, so as long as this image is within this bigger box right here, then you're okay. Now, personally, you could move that around within that. And again, all I would do is come down here, I would undo the knob, loosen that up, and remember that everything is going to be opposite. The way that the camera sees is opposite of what you are moving in real life. So sometimes this gets a little tedious, but it's tedious because you're trying to figure out exactly how to move opposite of what I'm actually seeing downrange. So I know that if I'm somewhere there, more than likely, I am going to be okay with my low light camera. I'm also going to actually calibrate my low light camera first before I do the actual calibration of my shot tracking camera. And so that's why I go into calibration first to check to make sure the image is good, because now when I come over here and I cancel my calibration, go back to my home button, administration, and then into my low light, when I launch the calibration, I will be able to see whether or not both cameras are going to be captured. Now, the difference between the low light camera and the shot tracking camera is the low light camera has a IR lens that has to be removed. So I'm going, once I launch the calibration, I don't see an image right now because my lens is on there. I'm going to simply come down and I'm going to remove the lens from the front of the shot tracking, the low light camera. Now, as you can see, I can see the image downrange. And again, because of how we orientate these, as long as you don't mess with the orientation on the plate itself, that's going to be within that image. There are two buttons on this particular, or two knobs on this camera. The one closest to the lens itself is the iris. The second one, which is closest to the body, is the focus. So if you look down range, the more I open or close the iris, so this is opening, that's allowing light to come in. You see how bright it is? And this is closing, which gets darker and darker because I'm closing off the iris. The thing about this is that it's actually moving it opposite of what you would think it would move it. So marked on this lens is a C and an O. O for open, C for close. But when I move it towards the C, or I'm pushing the O towards the C, that's actually opening it. When I'm pushing the C towards the O, that's actually closing it. Now, where do we want that to be? What we're trying to do is see as many images within the images that we can. So for instance, right here, if I open this up, all I can see is one big image. As I start to close that iris, I can now see a screen within a screen within a screen. I'm now at 3 screens there. Now I'm at 4 screens. Now I'm at 5 screens. If you can get to 5 screens with your iris, you are in the correct position, okay? You want to also be sure not to touch the lens on the iris cover. If you end up touching the lens, use something like a Kleenex or a Q-tip or something with a soft edge to wipe that off. Just use your breath to blow on it. Don't put any water on it, anything like that, but just go ahead and wipe those fingerprints off of there. So I'm gonna, while keeping this, I'm gonna move over to my instructor station. And now what I'm doing is I'm going to actually bring my, the red box on screen into place. And the reason that red box is, what that is telling the system is, although you see more than just this screen, I only want you to focus here. So I'm first going to start on my corners, and I'm going to bring that down. And once I have my corners, I'll do my edges. I have the ability to move that depending on the curve that the camera is seeing. But 9 times out of 10, that can be right in the center. And then once I decide that my red image is where I want it, then I am simply going to click on the confirm focus and area of interest and sit back while the system goes through its actual calibration process. What you're looking at here is a way for the camera to kind of orientate itself. It's just looking at the corners of the screen and the center. The number in the middle that is climbing right now is as it is automatically setting its exposure rating. That number really doesn't mean anything per se to you. It just gives you an idea of where it's at. Then it's going to go into this, which is going to be 3 dots in a triangle. That's what gives the camera its orientation. Then it checks its outside points, and then it goes to an 8x8 point scan. Now, the 8x8 point scan can be bumped up, and the higher that number is, the more accurate your shot tracking is going to be. We have found the 8x8 or 64 points is kind of the happy medium for everything that all of our customers use. That's why it defaults to 8x8. But what you're looking at here is the green is what the computer knows is the actual screen image, 82 inches by 144.775, okay? Then the red is what the camera sees, and each of those points up close, if you look, are drawn with the blue line. So the mathematical equation is taking place saying this point that the camera is seeing is connected to this point of the actual screen size. As long as you have straight lines, it doesn't really matter how that red is orientated within the green. What you do not want to have is jagged edges like this, where basically what is happening is the camera is seeing one point and thinking that it's attached to another point. Where you will really see those is that if during the calibration process your light significantly changes. So someone ends up opening up a window and sunlight floods the room, you'll end up seeing those kind of things on there. Now that I have my low light done, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully put that filter back on. Now this filter only has like 2 threads to it. It's made out of aluminum. It's a really soft material. So if you have to put any kind of muscle whatsoever on screwing this filter back on, then you have it cross-threaded, stop immediately. This should be able to be very easily put on. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put my finger on the camera's body to kind of give something to hold against, and I am just going to line that up and softly put it on. I'm not going to crank it down. I don't need to do any of that stuff. Now, this has not been disturbed whatsoever, and the final portion of this is going to be going into my shot tracking camera and calibrating that. So here I'm going to hit accept calibration. It says it has been successfully calibrated. Now I'm going to go to my home button, to my administration, and I'm going to go back into my V-tracking tools. Now during that process of when it's going in and out and that kind of stuff, you may end up getting, like we just had up there, a camera flashing up. You may end up clicking into this and this is still red. All that is saying that's nothing to be concerned about. We shut down the tracking services while we're calibrating the low light, and because of that, the system is just trying to catch up to itself. So now that we're in this section, I'm going to hit run calibration, because this is really important to be precise on. We have a zoom button. So we're going to zoom this in, and I am going to come in here and I'm going to bring this. Now, one of the things I've noticed here is that my image appears to be a little bit blurry. There is a focus that can be changed on the shot tracking camera. There is not an iris like in the open and close on the low light camera. There's no reason to manipulate that. So I can come over and come into my focus button and turn that so that it focuses downrange. Now, remember that there is always a lag time. So when you start to move these different focus buttons and stuff like that, there is a short little lag downrange. So whatever you do, you're always a little bit behind the input that you put into the camera. You're a little bit behind what is going to be seen downrange. So kind of move slow, get it to where you want. Now I come back here. Again, bring my corners in first. Okay, now the final thing is just to kind of clean up your area. You know what kind of training you're gonna put on. You know, you can end up having, just carefully move your wiring harness here. I can roll up the extra shot tracking camera harness behind here to just kind of dress it up, make it look a little bit nicer, a little bit less of a trip hazard, that kind of thing. You bring this down, you know, towards the screen at an angle, and it's going to allow you to have a little bit more training area here, and still not be able, so if I was a trainee, I'd be able to walk up the screen and still not be able to shadow anything. Again, over here, same thing. Now, because I'm completely uninterrupted, I could come around here, and it's not until I get to right about here that I'm actually starting to shadow on the screen. So the reality is at this point, we are now ready to train. You know, there's different things that you can do. You can go in there and you can check your pistols and your rifles, and you can check any of your less lethal devices on screen before your trainees come in. But the reality is your system is now up, ready to go for a good day of training. All right, so this is going to start off on the breakdown of the system. We have already set it up. We have already done our training for the day. And now it's time to pack up and get the room back to its original condition. I personally, the way that I work, the way my brain works, and the way that I kind of grow is that I like to have everything set out and prepped and ready to go for that put up. The good thing that I have found about that is that I seem to have less incidents where people are stepping on one of the cord ends and breaking an HDMI cord or a plug or an Ethernet plug or something like that. So the way that I kind of break it down is the same way that I set it up, really, which is kind of step by step. So once everything's done, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to shut down the laptop, and then I'm going to shut down the projector before I start unplugging things. The reason that is that if you unplug some of these wires in the wrong order before things are shut down, when you start the system back up, it will not capture those and project it the way it should, which is to have a on-screen image and a downrange image. You may end up getting situations, find yourself in, where you actually have both images on the laptop, and then you've got to know Windows and how to separate those and that kind of stuff. So the very first thing I'm going to do is come over to my laptop, to my power button. Hold there. You're going to see some pop-outs. Now, some of these buttons over here that you do see, they're related to other simulators like the V-180, the VST Pro, and even the V-300. They are not really related to the V-100. So the first thing that I always do when I get ready to shut down a system is I come to the first button, which is the Stop All Simulations. I just make sure that all of the simulations are stopped. There's nothing running in the background. And then on a V-100 like this, I click the power button again. I go down to Shut Down Systems, and I click on that. The system is then going to go through the process of properly shutting down the computer. That is going to take a little bit to do. Once that shuts down, the next thing that once I see that shutdown window happen, the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and shut down the projector. I point at the screen, I hit the power button twice, and then I wait until I have just one blue light on the projector. Okay, so now that I've got everything shut down, I'm going to begin the unplugging of the wiring harness and start to take it down. It doesn't matter in which order that you do it. I personally work from the farthest point away, which is your cameras and your projector, and then begin to work back down towards my audio speakers so that everything is unplugged. I just keep everything in the same order. So all I'm gonna do is come over here. I'm gonna unplug my cameras. I'm gonna set the tripod aside. I'm going to unplug my HDMI and my power. I'm gonna take my projector and I'm going to put the little foot in the front down, and I'm gonna close the lens at that point. Okay, once I have that unplugged, I'm gonna start to move over to my laptop. I'll just begin working around audio, mouse, cameras, HDMI, power cable. Move to my power strip and remove my power cords. And finally move to my audio speakers. Remove my RCMA plugs. Remove my power. And then I'm going to remove the positive and negative wires. Okay. Once I have that done, now I begin the pack up process. Okay, now that I have everything unplugged, rolled up, and set in front of each case here, I'm gonna go ahead and start packing it up and then show you how it packs into the box. The cases are laid out. Case number 1, which is for your laptop. Case number 2, which is for your speakers and your tracking cameras. Case number 3, which is for your wiring harness. I end up putting also the charger for the laptop in there. You never wanna stow the power block inside of case number 1 because you don't want to bust your screen or dent the outside of the laptop. And then obviously the projector goes in the final case. So I just go ahead and I start putting my devices in, zipping them up. Speakers in here. Your case should come with bubble wrap. Hopefully you still have that. If you don't, please contact VirTra so that you can get that, because these cameras are somewhat sensitive, so we want to make sure that they do have a little extra padding while they're inside the case in case they get bumped around. Make sure your wires are tucked inside so you don't zip them up and crush one of the wires. Obviously that wouldn't be good for you. Always put your projector with your lens upward so that it's not down inside of the box. Now just go backwards. Case number 3 goes in first. Your projector. Case number 2. Turn sideways. And then your laptop lays on top of that. All right, so now we're gonna get into the last portion of the teardown, which is a screen. One of the reasons I leave the screen to the very end is because I wanna make sure I have enough area to work in so nobody accidentally trips over anything. I don't actually lay the screen down where it tears, anything like that. So I get all my simulator packed up, put away, and then I begin working on the screen. How I tear down the screen depends on how many people I have with me to work with. If it's by myself, then I'm going to show it to you that way here shortly. But if I have another person, the very first thing I do is I end up taking the screen off. I get the screen out of the way before I get any chances of tearing it. The way I do that is I would put one person on one corner, I would be on the other corner, and I would begin taking and unsnapping the screen from the bottom and bringing it up to about halfway. Once I had it at halfway, myself and the other person would keep the white portion up, and then I would begin to tear it down. That way, if something comes undone and it falls down, you're having the white fall on the white, which is really important with the screens because you do not want to get your surface dirty or have marks on it, feet, footprints, anything else. So this is the difference if I was working with another person. Because I'm not working with another person, I am going to actually show you how I would tear this down by myself. So the first thing I'm going to do is re-snap this so that you can see it from the start and how I would tear down the screen. Okay, now that my screen is back in place, I'm now operating by myself. There isn't anybody else here to help me. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the screen out to a position. Typically, when we're setting these screens up, they're up against a wall so that we have the ability to have the most possible training room that there is. So I'm going to bring the screen out away from the wall. Then I'm going to come to the back of the screen and I'm going to remove the bottom speed cranks. This being the top, again, this being the bottom. So I'm going to remove my bottom speed crank on both sides of my screen. Now I'm going to go ahead and release the tension on the legs. And on this back leg, I'm going to bring it up and in, walk along supporting my screen. Again, release the tension on the support leg, bring it up and in. And now I'm going to lay my screen down on the ground. Once I have my screen laid down on the ground, I'm now going to work my way towards the top speed crank, and I'm going to take that one out. I can now take and fold up my T-leg, pressing the blue button again, which will release it. Then I'm going to bring it over and I'm going to set it into the box. I'm going to put my speed crank away. Now I'm going to take off the other leg, same way. I take that one off, put my leg away. Now I'm going to unbutton my screen the same way that I talked about doing it before, from the bottom up, but only about halfway so that I can keep it folded over and keep the white off of the ground. I want to try to keep as many creases out of the screen as possible. Although you're going to have some, no matter what, it is best to try and make sure they're at least linear as opposed to jagged and all over. I'm going to bring it back up, fold it one more time, and then finally, got one button on there that I missed. Just undo that. Now we begin to fold it in half. So I bring it over. One last time. If you notice, by doing it the way I did, now when I pull it out, I have my white top marked, so it's very identifiable to me, so I don't get into a situation where I may have to start taking it apart, looking at where the actual marking for the top of the screen is. I'm going to slide it into its protective case. Again, trying to keep it as flat as possible without getting any more creases in it. Close that up. The biggest thing on this is where people end up being unsafe as far as when this thing gets broke down. What you want to make sure is to keep it on the ground. I have seen some pretty significant injuries by people not understanding how this breaks apart, and then pieces of this kind of folding and pinching parts that you really don't want to have pinched. So we'll kind of break it down while it's on the ground. First thing I'm going to do is take out the center bar. Just going, everything was hand tight to begin with, so I shouldn't need wrenches or anything like that. I'm going to take the center bar, push the blue button, break that in half. The center bar is going to go into my case, and my two screws are going to go into my speed cranks. Now, because that is done, I can take this, put it in the bottom. I'll move my screen over here. Now what I'm going to do is first I'm going to break these, make sure that the corner pieces are unlocked. We're then going to, on one side, push the blue button and let the system kind of pop. It folds in half. As long as these are undone, that should fold down. Now I'm going to go down each knuckle. I'm going to push and allow it to slide in. Again, by keeping it on the ground, I have less likelihood of this thing popping and then pinching some part of my body that is not needing to be pinched. Once that's done, pick it up. I put it in the case. One of the things I have found is that, as you can see, the legs of the T legs, these things right here, are on the outside of the box. That allows this to sit a little bit more flat. Going to put the hard protective cover over that. That protective case is to further protect my screen, and then I'm going to place that. Now, some people have also added their own additional foam to keep that screen flat in there. It's not really for protective measures. It may not be needed at all. The biggest thing for me is that when I now transport this to wherever it's going to get stored, before I leave it, I want to make sure that screen is flat, because obviously if I pick up one end, that screen is going to want to go down to the end. It's going to bunch up down there. It's going to create more of the creases. When I go to actually store it, wherever that might be, I want to make one final prep and make sure that the screen itself is flat. All right, the system is now set up for to be put away either into a vehicle to be transported to a different location, or into a storage facility where you the end user stores their simulator. Thank you very much for watching this video, taking the time to look through the different chapters. We really hope it helps out and further explains some of the things that some of our end users are requesting from us.